Good to see you. How are you?
Fine.
Good. We were just, Casey and I were just saying, we're really close to 3:30 and we don't have anybody here, but most importantly, where's Leanne? So we're really happy to see you. And who else is there? Logan and Linda and Andrew. Hi, everybody.
Hello.
Hello. Well, we're going to wait a few minutes and see if we get everybody else coming on. So.
Sure.
Well. Logan, where are you at?
Well, I'm over in North Dakota. I'm a linguist for the MHA Nation, developing language revitalization materials.
Great. Well, glad you could join us.
Thanks for hosting.
It all feels so strange because I was really supposed to be in Montana this week, last week at Colang.
Yes.
Then that got canceled.
I know. It's so sad to think everything that's canceled and stuff. I know.
I was waiting for a minute or two on the wrong link.
Oh no.
Yesterday, and then I suddenly saw that it said it's scheduled for 2:30, the Salish instructors. And I thought I bet there's
I tried to separate them. That's why I put their link first and I put yours at the bottom so that people would not hopefully see that. It's so hard with the time differences. We've got 3 different time zones going on and everything else. Gosh. Yeah. There's Ace. Hi, Ace. Hi, Daniel. We got more people coming on. Hi, everybody. Cheney's there. Is that Milani? Who else do we have? Let's see, I don't see Gerald yet. I don't see, oh, it's just 3:30, a little past 3:30, so.
Well, I hope they didn't make this same mistake I almost did.
Well, they'll email us if that's the case and we'll help them. Got a few emails yesterday, we'll see.
Yeah.
Hi, Cheney. Who's the little one?
Hello, everybody.
Oh.
Hello.
Babies. Cuddly, yeah, is her name.
Cuddly's her name?
Cuddly, yeah.
Yeah.
Now, did you have twins, did I hear?
Yeah, we had twins.
Oh my gosh, congratulations. Oh wow, how adorable.
Yeah, hanging out. My wife's in here listening to.
Good, good.
There's a definite family resemblance there.
So is that 5 now, Cheney?
We have 8.
8, oh my gosh, I love it.
We always, when we kind of tell our story, it's funny because every kid gets practice on with language. Our first one, we really, we tried, and each one we get better. So we're hoping with these girls, it's way more, a lot better. But
Wow, that's great.
yeah, our oldest she's 18, goes to Haskell.
Oh wow.
So
Ah,
18.
so that's where we got Cuddly's t-shirt from. I love it. That's great. Wow, isn't it? It's amazing to me to think you have an 18-year-old.
It's crazy.
Oh, we've got 16. Let's see. Oh, there's Milani. So who's okay? Rebecca, Amy, Alicia. Hello. Hi, everybody. Malia's here too. Hi. Okay. We'll wait just a couple more minutes and then we'll get going, okay?
Okay.
Casey, you haven't heard from Gerald if he's having problems again. We don't see him yet.
No, I haven't seen them or heard from him yet.
There's Lanny. Hi, Lanny. And Jay's here. Hi.
Oh, shit.
Casey, can you send an email to Gerald, just see if he's going to join us by phone or if he's having any problems?
Okay.
He can just join us by phone. I don't see him here. And I know he'd really be sad if he missed out. Hi, Steepy. Hi, Corrine. Shodine, hi. Alicia, Milani. We've got Malia, Rebecca. Yeah. Well, everybody, I think we'll go ahead and get started so that we have ample time for questions and answers at the end. It's great to see all of you, and a special welcome to Dr. Leanne Hinton. We're so excited that you're here today to share the Master-Apprentice model with everybody. We're all familiar with your work and very excited about this session. For those of you that were with us yesterday, we so appreciated everybody up on the Flathead Reservation, all of our Salish friends, our teachers and learners of the language, sharing what they've been working on. And again, I'm Ioana Karjuza. I'm the director of the Center for Bilingual and Multicultural Education at MSU. And we've been working with our friends from Turtle Mountain and Gerald Gray Sr. and sharing what everybody has been doing to, if we want to say, maintain and preserve instead of revitalize the language. As we talked yesterday, this idea that we just want to make sure the languages are passed down generation to generation, and we are working towards that on all different levels. And we're so excited to have this continuation of webinars. And so, Dr. Hinton, we're very happy that you're here to join us. So if it's okay, we'll go ahead and let you start. There was a handout that was sent out. We have a couple new faces. We'll make sure you get that. And if you have questions, you'd like us to wait to the end, Leanne, is that what you'd prefer?
Yeah, I guess I will give my presentation and then open it up for not just questions, but discussion and hearing more about what other people are doing.
Sounds great.
Thank you. Yeah, well, I'm happy to be here too. As I was saying before we started, I'm supposed to be in Montana now, but instead, like all of you, I'm at home sheltering in place. And I have a little office in a little cottage we have in the backyard, but it's not very good with the internet signal. So I'm sitting here in my kitchen table here to talk with you guys. I listened to the second half of the Salish presentation yesterday because I've forgotten about the time difference, so I didn't get there on time. But Casey gave me the link to the first half so that I was able to listen to that this morning and get the whole thing. And I'm really impressed with the great work that you're doing at the Salish Language School to develop adult fluency. And you know, Dr. Realbird reminded me yesterday of a visit to 20 years ago with Nancy Richardson Steele that we did in Arlee. And also 13 years ago, I dropped by the immersion school on the Flathead Reservation. I don't even think I had an appointment, but I just dropped by, and everybody was extremely kind and showed me around. And it sounds like things are better than ever now. So I'm going to start a PowerPoint. So let me just, let's see, I share the screen. And open this and play from start. So I'm going to talk about the Master-Apprentice language learning program, and I'm going to talk a little bit first about the history of it. It's, let's see, I'm not having a, why am I not able to go forward? Here we go.
There you go.
My keyboard's not working on it. So this is a program that was developed by a group I belong to called the Advocates for Indigenous California Language Survival. And it was founded in 1992. There was another group called another organization called the Native California Network. And they held a meeting that a bunch of us went to. It was mostly elders from who had been who were speakers, who had been teaching their language, who had been language activists all their lives, but they were getting old and they weren't finding any speakers coming up behind them. And so it was really a very emotional meeting. The goal of the meeting was to figure out how Native California Network could be useful to the language issues. And as a result of that meeting, what the final statement was we've got to have new speakers. You know, we've got to figure out a way for new speakers to come up into our language. And so the Advocates was founded first as a committee to the Native California Network. And that organization actually disappeared. So we were under various other umbrellas until we became our own nonprofit. And this is the current board of directors. The board is languages from north to south. And Lanny may recognize one member of the board here, that's Nancy, that came to Montana with me. And she represents Karuk language. There's Hupa language. There's one member of the board's not here actually, who's Mutsun, and all these languages from north to south. And here at the left side is Stan Rodriguez, who represents Kumeyaay, the southernmost language. So we're a very active board. I'm an advisory board member. And our mission statement was to foster the restoration and revival of Indigenous California languages so that they may be retained as a permanent part of the living cultures of Native California. And what we recognized right from the beginning is that we couldn't, children are the people that ought to be learning the language, but there was nobody to teach the children. And we call this the missing generation. There's few or no professional or parent age speakers who could teach the younger generation. And the current activists were young to middle-aged adults who did not learn their language as kids, but want it and want their children to learn it. And so those are the people that we realized we have to target. Those are the people that need to become speakers that are fluent enough to teach the children. And you guys, as yesterday's presentation showed, you guys are very familiar with this situation. And so we also knew that it takes a lot to become a fluent speaker, or even an intermediate speaker. So this is the American Council on the Teaching of Foreign Languages, and they say, okay, a language like Spanish is pretty easy to learn because it's in the same general language family that is Indo-European. And there's lots of borrowings, and so the Romance languages are pretty easy for an English speaker to learn. But the further away you get from English, the harder it is to learn. And so Greek is around 1100, Chinese around 2200. So Native American language is in the Greek to Chinese range, that it's enough different from English to take a much longer to learn it. And so we knew it had to be intensive learning, as the Actful says, and what counts as intensive learning. Some of us, as we were talking about this, we knew about Stephen Krashen, who talks about comprehensible input, and the target language is the crucial and necessary ingredient for the acquisition of language. So the best method are therefore those that supply comprehensible input in low anxiety situations containing messages that students really want to hear. So he's talking about immersion. And there have been, over the years, a lot of indigenous models for learning endangered languages that have developed that are creative and new. And I had to put the Salish Adult Apprentice program in after I heard yesterday's session, but that's one of them. And of course, that program is aimed toward schools, and immersion schools have been some of the greatest success stories for growing young speakers of the language. They have their issues, such as what happens afterwards. Is there enough support for the language for the learners to be able to continue speaking it and using it and doing things within the community that demand it? But that is the key to the future of the language, when people can have immersion schools. I'm just going to go through pictures for these models that people have been making. So this is the Hawaiian, couple of Hawaiian immersion school pictures that I cadged from the web. Like a lot of you, I visited immersion schools in Hawaii, and they are absolutely fabulous. There's wonderful immersion schools in on the mainland, right here in Montana even. The problem with immersion schools is just that not everybody can have an immersion school. It takes a lot of effort, takes a lot of human resources, it takes funding, it takes materials development, and there's an awful lot of languages that where the population is too small or too scattered. There might not even be a physical community. So there's a lot of languages that just can't do immersion schools. So to me, for kids, I feel like in California, the main hope is with families more than with schools, but we'll get to that. So one of the methods right here in Montana is Stephen Graymorning's accelerated second language acquisition method, which is picture-based. So there's lots of ways in which immersion can take place because of the nonverbal aspects, and picture-based is his nonverbal way of communicating meaning as he's speaking, or as his students are speaking. And I think this is a fabulous method. I think if there's a flaw in the method, it's what he recognizes and calls like getting it off the wall. That immersion, you're immersed in third person. So learning to talk to each other about me and you doesn't occur. You can so long as you're just using that method, because what you're learning is you're learning how to talk about what people in the pictures are doing, or what, and so you can actually learn to tell a really long story without being able to hold a conversation. And what that just goes to show is that these really good models, and this is one of them, can't live on their own, that everybody needs to use as many different models as possible. Another model that I really like is the root word method that I saw in action a few years ago up in the Six Nations Reserve in Canada. And it was developed by this man's father. Do you see my arrow when I move it, or do I have to make it into a pin? Maybe I have to make
We can see your arrow, yeah.
Oh, good. Thank you. So David Miracle was the person who developed this method. So what I like about this method is this, that there's always a debate as to, should people learn through conversational immersion or should people learn through grammatical analysis? And what's great about this method is that you're learning both ways at once. So this teaches the components of words, so that you're learning roots, and you're learning prefixes and suffixes and how they go together. And you're learning to use language through that kind of analysis. But at the same time, the whole thing is being taught in the language. So you're also getting full immersion at the same time. And I was quite impressed with it when I went to their classrooms and saw how well the students were learning. Where Are Your Keys is another great model that's lots of fun. And it's game-based and it's sign-based. And so you actually learn American Sign Language as well as the language that you're targeting. And so again, it's sort of a multi-channel learning where you're getting, you have a sign actually for each word, and so you're learning two ways, you know. And I makes me think of Daryl Kipp, who used to teach plain sign language as part of the immersion process, where you're learning through two channels at once, through the sign and through the actual word that you're saying. And it has certain features to it that are really fun, such as signs to lower stress. Remember that crash and quote that said that you want a low anxiety situation that people are invested in. And so they have signs for things like, I've had enough, you know, or something like that. So that, and that's a sign that you're supposed to relax and do something a little different. There's Zalmai here that I don't know whether any of you know him yet, but he's really quite an impressive language teacher. He teaches Yeshutseed, and he's developed some models and strategies and methodologies that are really great. In fact, I'm actually taking a workshop right now that they're sitting in on a workshop where he's teaching 5 different language groups this method of reclaiming domains and language nesting. So he has a different definition of language nest than we're used to. We're used to language nest being a preschool situation where the children are put into this place where they're fed like a bird feeds his babies in the nest. They fed language. But what Zeke thinks of as a language nest is a physical location that you give to the language. So you're making the language nested in that location. And his workshop is how to make your bathroom into a language nest, where you learn various domains, such as washing your hands. You learn how to say that in your language. You learn how to say taking a shower, even sitting on the toilet, all of these things that you're learning, so that eventually you will enter your bathroom and no longer speak English there. Okay, so let's get to the Master-Apprentice program. Now, first of all, looking at this map, you can see that California is an extremely diverse linguistic area. There's 80 languages at least, and these languages have very few speakers. Most of them have less than 5. Even when we started, there were 30 languages that had 0 speakers. And we actually developed a different program for people with no speakers called the Breath of Life Archival Institute for California Languages. So these are for people who have to study documentation in order to regain their language. So we weren't going to be teaching language. that was obvious. We were going to be developing strategies for learning language that we could teach to people who were trying to bring their language back. And so this means that we had expectations for the language learners that were different from, say, somebody who's trying to learn a foreign language. We want the learner to become orally proficient. We were not particularly using writing. I'll go over why. And the learner would not only learn the language, but would learn to use the language in his daily life, even if he didn't really have very many people to speak with. But the learner is going to learn both within the context of cultural traditions and his or her current daily life, which represents certain challenges, because if the language hasn't been used for a long time, there's lots of things that are hard to talk about in modern daily life. So it even means that they're going to be discussing how to make words that even the master speaker, the native speakers, may not have words for, which also creates interesting debates. We want the learner to be a language activist, and the learner will eventually be the one who's going to pass the language on to the next generations. So the learner has high expectations, or we have high expectations of learners. We do in an endangered language situation that you are all in too. So just a brief look at what the Master-Apprentice program is. It's also called the Mentor-Apprentice program in many places. Some people don't like the term master, and I don't either. That's why I call them master speakers a lot, or speakers. But the reason that we called it the Master-Apprentice program was because at the time we developed it, there was a state-wide program for the arts called the Master-Apprentice program for the arts, so the master sculptor would take on an apprentice, or the master carver, the master basket maker. So it's that kind of master that we're talking about, a master language speaker. It's a tool to help in the goal of the community's language revitalization process. And the typical session for the typical team for California is 1 speaker and 1 apprentice. But there's variations on this even in California. You can have 2 speakers with 1 apprentice, or 1 speaker with 2 apprentices. What we don't want is something that will develop into a classroom, because a part of the Master-Apprentice program involves bonding. Really, the bond between the speaker, or the native speaker, and the apprentice, the stronger the bond is, the better the language revitalization, the language learning takes place for the apprentice. So we don't want it to become a classroom. And also, we don't have very many speakers. So, but the apprentices love it when they can have more than 1 speaker, because one interesting problem is that if an apprentice works with only 1 speaker, they find that when they go talk to another speaker, they can't understand them. There's enough variation between speakers of any language that you have to be able to recognize what's variation, what kinds of variation might exist on what you're hearing. So the more speakers somebody can learn from, the better it is. So the 1 speaker, 1 apprentice, or variation there, spending intensive time together. We've settled on 10 hours per week or more. We tried 20 hours, but very few people could make it. Conversing in the language being learned with the goal of the apprentice becoming conversationally proficient. And they would be doing this through activities, including their daily life activities. And that helps with being able to spend time together. You don't have to say, well, I can't come over because I have to do my laundry. You bring your laundry over and do it there, while you're also learning all the vocabulary that comes with doing laundry. So the teaching and learning of useful language is what will be focused on, that the learner can use. And the apprentice is being prepared to pass the language on to others through school, family, or community. And we like to quote what Daryl Kipp used to say, which is, if you learn one word, pass that word on. He says, he used to say, go to your neighbor's house, turn off the TV, tell them to turn off the TV, tell them to go get the kids. I learned a new word today, I want to pass it on to you. So this is our manual. The Master-Apprentice manual is titled How to Keep Your Language Alive. It's available at Heyday Books. So we talk about principles. We sort of vary what we call our principles from time to time. We get fewer or lesser principles. Almost everything is inside one of those principles, but the one that always stays with our set is leave English behind. Stay in the language. If you find yourself slipping into English, get right back into your language. And you can do this partly by reminding each other. This is not easy to do. So one of the first things that we have people do is learn some survival phrases, we call them. They're very important in our program. So one survival phrase is you learn how to say in your language, let's keep speaking our language, if you realize that you've stopped speaking your language. Or the apprentice learns how to say to the master speaker who might have said something in English, say that in our language. Or to the master speaker, to the apprentice, we ask them to repeat what the apprentice just said, repeat it in your language, and then ask the apprentice to say it in the language. It's very hard for these speakers, these native speakers, to get back in the habit of using the language, because usually it's been for many years since they've really been able to talk to somebody in their language. And so, and here's somebody who at the beginning may not know anything about the language. And so how do you keep talking in your language to somebody who's not understanding you? And the apprentice can get upset over not being able to understand either. So we've developed a kind of an intermittent immersion. Nancy set the name to it. It's called an immersion set. So what we train the team to do is to plan their immersion set in English. And then they do the immersion set. And then they can go back to English and talk about what was good about it or what needed fixing. And then they go right back and repeat the immersion set again. So let's say that you're doing an activity of washing dishes. So you actually want to do this activity. And you might plan in advance, say, okay, we're going to wash dishes. So why doesn't the master tell me what to do, and I'll do it you tell me what to do in the language, and also gesture to help me understand what you're saying. And I'll try to repeat what you're saying, but mostly I will do what you say. And so they say, okay, on your marks, get set, go. And then everything will take place in the language. Now, sometimes that won't go smoothly. So you say, maybe after 2 minutes, you'll say, this isn't working. You're translating for me, or the master will say to the apprentice, you're not understanding what I'm saying. So you'll fix it. You'll try to figure out how can we fix what went wrong and do it again. So we hope our immersion sets at the beginning would be at least 5 minutes long, and then hopefully 10 minutes long. And pretty soon they can take the entire session, or at least the entire activity of washing dishes in this case. Then you have to figure out what you're going to do next. Okay, so principle 2 is use nonverbal communication. And again, that's something that people have to learn how to do because they aren't necessarily used to doing nonverbal communication at least not very much. We all do some just automatically, but you have to learn how to, in the case of washing dishes, if the speaker is trying to teach the learner the phrase of pick up that dish, he has to point to the dish and, get some kind of gesture going where he will pick up the dish. And so we actually have exercises during our training where one exercise, it's also a good icebreaker. One exercise is to have to give out a bunch of cards to people. They can either be masters or apprentice. So you give out a card and you can't show your card to anybody, but on that card it has something that you have to get somebody else to do. And then with using no English, you have to get a person who doesn't know your language to do that action. So if you want, for example, two people to exchange coats with each other, then you have to figure out through gestures how you're going to communicate to somebody to do that. So this is what we want the teams to be doing, is learning a lot of nonverbal communication. You can use pictures, you can use objects, but the most viable kind of nonverbal communication is doing activities together. That's really how babies learn their first language. It's the context of what's going on provides the meaning to the sounds that he's hearing. And so it's this multi-channel learning that we want our teams to learn. And TPR, total physical response, you probably, that is one of the methods that uses this multi-channel physical kind of learning. And the immersion schools usually have some understanding of that kind of learning. So learning through activities is principle 3. And these are just a few pictures of some of our trainings. This is wordless books is one of, I'll be talking more about them because it's one of our favorite activities for training. It's a very low stress activity. This is puppet making that we also do in our training, but different people like different activities. So we went up to Nunavut one year, and in the workshop that we were giving, it turned out that people there, that square dancing was a big part of their self-entertainment. And one of the elders said, well, we used to do all the calls of the square dance in our language, in Inuinnaqtun instead of English. And so that became one of the activities that they wanted to master in the language. Also in Inuinnaqtun, up there, the string figures are really popular. So that was another activity that was done there. And this is a training we did in Nova Scotia for Gaelic, and our only European language other than Sami now that we've done training for. And they love singing. And so learning how to sing a song is one thing. Sing songs is one of the things that the apprentices like to learn. And this is a group action. It's a traditional job that people used to do when they would weave cloth. Then they would have to bang this long cloth on a table to soften it and to clean it. And so they would sing songs to go with that. So there's so many activities, and those are basically the domains that we want our teams to focus on. Household, like cooking, making coffee, washing dishes, clothes, watch TV with the sound turned off, making beds, arts and crafts, drawing, coloring, basketry, traditional crafts, outdoors, One of our best teams in the early days was a father-son team that liked to hunt together, and they would go for 2 weeks of whenever they had a chance to camp and hunt. And he came back in a year very, very proficient in the language. So fishing, gathering, shopping, games, board games, card games, traditional gambling, sports games, if people are active. And family, again, pictures are so helpful. So family photo albums are great conversation starters, and wordless books. So we also, I probably should have had this slide earlier. The master speaker needs to use more language than she normally would, as well as these gestures and actions. So here I'm just illustrating washing dishes, where either the master could give directions, like take this plate, put it in the water, or let's say that it's the master that's doing the washing, then she would describe it in detail. I'm picking up this plate, I'm putting it in the water, I'm scrubbing it with the sponge. Or the master could say to the apprentice, you are picking up the plate, you're putting it in the water, and now you're scrubbing it with the sponge. So you learn grammar that way too. And and then eventually what we want, in fact, sooner rather than later, if possible, is for the learner to do the self-narration or to describe what the master's doing. These wordless books are a lot of fun because they are a relaxed way that immersion can take place. It's the one activity where there's really low stress for both the master and the apprentice, because the master can talk about what's going on in the picture or tell the story, the narrative of the story that the pictures are showing, and knows that the apprentice understands because the apprentice is seeing the picture. And the apprentice too, even if the apprentice doesn't really understand the words, he knows what's going on in the picture, and so could feel relaxed. It's a very relaxing kind of immersion activity. So principle 4, the apprentice is a language hunter. We took this word from Where Are Your Keys? I love this term, language hunter. But what it refers to is that more often than not, the apprentice will take the lead in the language learning process, deciding what to learn, practice it, what to practice and use it between sessions. The apprentice will do the preparations needed for a session. If you're deciding that next time you want to cook a dish and learn the vocabulary and phrases for cooking, then it's probably the apprentice who will do the shopping and get the materials to bring. And the apprentice also has to send reports to the ICLs as to how they're going. So, and the apprentice will talk to mentors that we'll talk about in a little bit. And to help with the apprentice taking the lead is the very first phrases that we ask the apprentice to learn are these survival phrases. What is that? What is this? Or what are those? What are you doing? What am I doing? What are he or she doing? Here you can put a little bit of English in the empty line. You say, how do you say in your language? And then you can say an English phrase that you want the teacher to tell you. Also, more survival phrases, say it again, say it slower. So in this way, they can elicit language from the speaker without using English. So again, this is a way to...
Are you able to?
So we also make sure that people realize that what they're really trying to focus on is verbs and sentences. It's so easy to say, okay, today we're going to learn the numbers, and tomorrow we're going to learn the household objects, and the next day we're going to learn animals or colors. But you're not speaking. If you know, as actually an apprentice the other day just said was, if I know the word for basket, I can't speak. I can't say anything. Basket, basket, basket. But if I know verbs, then then I'm a speaker. I can say, this is a basket, or touch the basket, or pick up the basket, or I love this basket. So we want people right away to start with sentences and presenting new vocabulary through sentences. Principle 6 is listening and speaking rather than writing during immersion sessions. One reason we didn't want to focus on writing, besides the fact that we were really just trying to get people to be speakers, is that people would tell us, we can't learn our language because we don't even have a writing system. So how can we start teaching and learning our language without a writing system? Well, that was one of the myths that we wanted to dispel. You don't have to have a writing system to learn your language. Think about how children learn their first language. They learn to speak long before they ever learn to write. Also, writing new words down stops the immersion. So you're in the midst of washing dishes and all of a sudden you hear the word for dish soap for the first time. You're not going to say, oh, excuse me, I got to dry my hands and get my piece of paper and my pen and start writing down these words. That just stopped the immersion. So immersion in real activities doesn't give time for writing words down. Also, people will use writing as a crutch, that they feel like they have the word if it's on paper, but they don't have the word in their brain. We're trying to get people to have the words in their brain rather than on paper. So we suggest record your speaker if you must. Actually, we love it if you record your speaker, but that is a way to keep your language that you're learning ready for you to go back to and review anytime. And we, so rather than write things down, but we also do think that writing has a role. So writing is good for planning immersion sessions. So for example, Zeke has us, or he actually had these materials ready for the languages, that he had lead people who were creating phrases and writing them down. And so those phrases then, the students are taking into the room, that they're into the bathroom in this case. So if they're washing hands, they have 5 phrases that they're supposed to say while they're washing their hands, and they're reading them off, and they're supposed to post them in appropriate places around the house. And this is something that is fine with us, that for planning immersion sessions, if you want to write some things down, so long as you plan to get away from the paper, and so long as you're going to use those phrases over and over again until you know them thoroughly, then it's fine to write them. If you have a writing system. That was the other thing, is that just in California, a lot of people did not have writing systems, official writing systems that they could learn, or had learned. And there's really no education process in most places for people to learn a writing system, even if the tribe has one. So we just don't want people to feel like they have to write, and if they just write it any old way, we know they're not going to be able to pronounce it when they try to read it either. So recording is really important. We like people to keep a journal of their language learning process, and so they can be writing in their journal each night and writing down things that they learned. Also, I mentioned the Breath of Life Institutes, where the only thing that the only way they can learn their language may be through written documentation. And it's good for finding grammatical patterns if you are able to write down words like, or phrases like, I'm washing the dishes, you're washing the dishes, he's washing the dishes, you're finding out about grammar. Okay, so principle 7 is learn language you can use and use it. So choose domains that you can use every day. Things that you can say to your children, if that's what your goal is to work with your children on the language, then you want to learn things that you can say to your children and that you can teach them to say to you. Brushing your teeth or getting dressed or chores, games, getting ready for bed. So, or if you're a teacher, then the things that you might want to focus on, to some extent, you'll want to focus on lessons perhaps, but Master-Apprentice really wants you to learn conversational language. And so you would not only be focusing on lessons perhaps, but you would be focusing on classroom management, where you're learning how to say, come on in, put your coat over there. Sit down, everybody, and stop talking now. And also patter. What people who are not fluent fear when they go into a classroom where they're trying to stay in the language is, what do you say when the lesson's over? If today you were going to learn about occupations, maybe you've learned phrases like he's a policeman, but then all of a sudden the lesson is over, and what are you going to do? So patter, telling the story of what something that happened on the way to work, that's what happens to most classrooms. And so the things that go on in classrooms between the actual teaching are important to learn. Self-narration. So I mentioned self-narration as when somebody is doing something and actually describing what he's doing while he's doing it. What's important about self-narration, even though it's not language that you would normally use, that it's language that you can use in your daily life, even if you have nobody to talk to. And so it's very important to learn how to talk about these things in the first person so that you can talk to yourself. We already talked about language nesting, where you take a particular room of the house and turn that into your language nest. And then conversation topics. For the Master-Apprentice team, early on especially, you really want to learn topics that you would use when you're not focusing on, let's learn how to wash the dishes together. So how do you greet each other when you come in the house? How do you, if you're going to the master speaker's house, what do you say first? You should say it in the language. Do you have coffee together? Then have that be one of the first domains that you learn. Talking about the weather, what you did yesterday, learn how to talk about what we shall do next time, so that you don't have to just have immersion sets, but you have informal conversation going on as much as possible. And one exercise that I've suggested to people is to actually, when you're not together, just when you're alone at home, take a few hours and notice what you're doing and write it down. What are you doing and what are you saying? So I wake up in the morning and maybe hug my husband in bed next to me and say, what will we have for breakfast? And then maybe we make breakfast and then we sit at the table and we talk about what we're doing for the day or what we did yesterday. So I like to have people just write down about 3 hours, 5 hours of everything they did and everything they talked about. And each of those items can be a domain of language that you want to learn from the master speaker. And we can't emphasize enough how important it is to use the language between sessions. That's why self-narration is important. That's why it's important to teach others. It's important to practice everything you learned and to be using language as much as possible. 8, be kind to each other. So we want the speaker to learn how to correct without criticizing, to model correct form, to offer praise when the apprentice does something right. So you model it the right way instead of saying, oh, you did it wrong. Just say it the right way. And try not to be critical. And the apprentice also has to learn to be patient with his own confusion. And if your master is going to be critical or is going to laugh at you, you've got to develop a strong back, as one of our apprentices said, to just accept it and to view mistakes as learning moments and to be brave, to make those mistakes, to know you're not going to say something right so that you can be corrected and learn it a better way, and so that you can be speaking the language, right or wrong. Keep crashing in mind that a low anxiety situation is best for learning. So survival phrases like, I don't understand, or I'm full, let's take a break, I can't remember, tell me again. These are phrases you want to learn in the language so that you as an apprentice don't have to be stranded somehow without being able to say anything. Have fun. Play games, make jokes, do activities that make you laugh. What you're doing is definitely serious and powerful business by carrying on your language, but that doesn't mean you have to be serious all the time. And also just ways of breaking the tension and having fun makes you learn better. And finally, teach what you learn. Use it with your spouse, with your children, with your grandchildren, your friends. Develop a conversation group. Use it on social media. Use it on Zoom, below Zoom. Record your phone greeting in the language. So use it any way you can. And these are pictures here of family language use. So we're developing also a family language program that goes side by side with the Master-Apprentice program, where families will learn, these families are learning the activity of washing the dishes. This family is actually doing homeschooling in the language, so that they've been through the Master-Apprentice program, and in fact, Piowa's father is a very fluent speaker and has been a master to both of them, and he's been a master to his wife, and they are all using the language at home with their kids. So just a typical session would be then that the team gets together, they greet each other, they have these rituals that they do, like coffee making or starting with a prayer or a song. Review has to be an intensive part of each session. It doesn't have to be the next thing you do, but it has to be either part of either repeat immersion sets that you did before, or do or incorporate the vocabulary and phrases into a new kind of immersion set. So you might plan your immersion set and then do it, critique it, repeat, keep on doing that with longer and longer immersion sets, and until you, and then once you're through with, let's say maybe you've done an immersion set for 3 weeks now and you feel like you really don't need to do it anymore. You can start another immersion set, or another couple of immersion sets, or 3 or 4. You can be doing 3 or 4 domains that you take turns working on. And then for part of the time, do something relaxing, like a game or a wordless book, or a conversation that's a simple conversation that where you know some of the languages, that you know how to answer a question of who did you see today, or something like that. And then make your plans for next time. and say your farewells. So the first and the last words should always be in the language. This is just one of our sessions. So we have training sessions with 12, a dozen languages or so usually. Our training sessions go over the principles and the session design. We have exercises all throughout where people are doing immersion sets and demoing immersion sets. In later trainings, we'll go over obstacles, how to get beyond a plateau. It may include breakout sessions for masters and apprentices where the masters get together and the apprentices get together and share issues that they have or triumphs that they've had. We show them how to do planning. We don't want them to be, they get kind of lost if they don't have a specific plan of domains that they want to master. And so they should make a specific plan of like 5 domains that they want to be sure to master over the next 6 months, and come back ready to talk about those domains and how they've done. We do assessments. I won't talk about assessments very much here, but during the question period, if people want me to, I would. And then the teams go home and we usually give them language kits. So a beginning language kit would be an empty journal and pen, a wordless book or 2, copy of the manual, some art materials, maybe, and maybe a card game like Uno. And then they're on their own from then on until the next training, except for mentoring. So what we try to do is to have a mentor assigned to each team or to various teams who will call them every couple of weeks or text them or Zoom. Now that we all know Zoom, they could Zoom, and discuss how things are going and give them that shot in the arm that they might need to keep their motivation high. And then the mentor should also go visit them once or twice a year. Remember, we're dealing with all of California, so we can't expect really long trips really often. There's lots of flavors of Master-Apprentice programs as it's spread around the world. So we already talked about more than one apprentice and more than one master. We do a multilingual program. The First Peoples Cultural Council in British Columbia is another one that does a multilingual program. These are run then by intertribal organizations but then a single language program run by a specific community or a specific tribe. That program can be even better than a multilingual program because it can be really developed for your own language, and you can have multiple teams that can trade off with each other or get together frequently. So you go visit each other, you can have dinners and gatherings more frequently. So a single language program is really the best kind to have. We've seen that MAP programs can be related to schools for increasing teacher fluency, or maybe even using some of the MAP Master-Apprentice methods in the school, and family-based programs where elders will work with a whole family or learners teach children as they learn. So it's a pretty flexible kind of model. And some groups have modified the manual. The Sock and Fox program in Oklahoma, that used to be run by Jacob Manitoa Bailey and is now run by Katie. Forget her last name all of a sudden, but they have a model where they have what Jacob sometimes calls a master apprentice, meaning an advanced apprentice, so that when new people come in, the advanced apprentice will actually be working with them before they actually start working with a native speaker. And then the FPCC, First Peoples Cultural Council, has modified their manual for for their area, and it's actually on the FPCC website so that you could find it there. Linguists in Brazil and Russia have translated the manual, actually not linguists, but language activists, have translated our manual into Portuguese or Russians and adapted them to the indigenous cultures there. I'm not going to talk much about assessment unless people ask me to, as I said, but I just want to say that there are other kinds of assessment besides assessing improvement in conversational ability. There's also the reporting of language use. How much is an apprentice using his language beyond sessions? Is he using it an hour a day, for example? So you can be measuring that instead of conversational ability, or you can be measuring the language in the community. So we're talking about this in Zeke's workshop right now. Instead of measuring the competency of individuals, look at how many people are speaking it. You know, how much or how often do they use it? And how many ways do they use it? Do you hear the language more in ceremony than you used to? Do you hear people greeting each other on the street? So these are also ways to assess whether the language is strengthening. It's not just on individual ability. And finally, I just want to talk about an article that is on the web. And so in the handout I gave you is actually just a handout of references about Master-Apprentice and about the other programs that I talked about. And this article was about the Master-Apprentice model and well-being that they found, and we certainly have found it in California too, the evidence of improved physical and emotional well-being by teams that have been working together. There's a kind of a healing of the generation gap. There's tension between the generations over language loss. Sometimes each generation is blaming the other generation. Why didn't she teach me my language? Well, you didn't want to learn because you got home from first grade and said you never wanted to hear the language again. But this is a healing event that takes place. It's a bonding, as I said before, between generations that takes place. And for the apprentice, it's an increased sense of confidence and belonging and indigenous identity. For the master, being able to use the language with someone and a sense of being useful and appreciated. So we were, of course, really pleased to see the Master-Apprentice model. They're working with the one in Canada that FPCC is running. But we were pleased with that. But I really got to say that I don't think the Master-Apprentice program is unique in this regard. I think any of the programs that I mentioned and the programs that you are doing have the same result, because it's not just about one way to learn the language. It's that having the language strengthening in yourself and in your community it's not even about language, right? I mean, there's food ways that are being regenerated. There's there's traditional crafts. There's values that are being learned or used, that these things are being strengthened, not just by language, but by whatever path you choose. And in the end, it's really about the autonomy to make your own choices as a community and to survive as an indigenous community that this model and any other model that is successful in language learning provides. So that's my presentation, and I would really like to open it up now to questions or to discussion of any sort. Don't forget to unmute yourself.
Hey, Leanne, Lanny here.
Hi.
Yeah, we had a good time that time. It's hard to imagine that it was 20 years ago. And we
Yeah.
were talking on a phone, and you've come a long ways, and we revere your abilities and your dedication, and hope that you can continue and have that energy and good health to take you to many camps like this, where we could come together. And I have a couple of things that I wanted to ask you. First, I'll ask this one and then leave it for somebody else to ask, and come back if there is some gaps there.
Mm-hmm.
Could you emphasize for our contingency here the importance of contact time, as well as the perspective of acquiring basic fluency in terms of like how many hours of a day would you recommend to dedicate this, maybe in different age levels? Maybe we're talking about youth to young adults.
Well, I think it varies, because there's the length of time of being exposed to the length of time of being exposed to the language. If people are being exposed or are exposing themselves by listening or speaking it for at least an hour a day, then I think they've really made headway. But it should be every day. And one of the problems, say, with community language classes that meet once a week or once a month, is that if there's not something that that those students are doing every day, then they've pretty much lost things in between classes. So an hour a day would be great. 2 hours a day would be better.
One of the I guess one of the founding members of the Salish folks is named Pete, and he said if we continued in the basically in the models that they have in public schools, like teaching maybe a half hour to an hour, maybe 2 hours a week, it would take somebody 25 years to learn a language.
That's right.
So what would you think your tact and strategy be to encourage some schools to have more contact time?
Boy, I don't know. I don't know how to get the schools to have more contact time. I mean, the schools themselves are, if they're public schools, for example, they are so chained by policies that and by what they're supposed to be teaching. I mean, the language policy is, I guess, the policy the strategy you need is to change language policy to allow more language in the school.
Awesome. Very simple and direct. Thank you.
I had one little question. What happened to Jacob? Did they run him out of his little camp?
Well, he left and left that program in good hands of one of his most advanced apprentices, who's still running it. I mean, I guess there were some political things going on, and but he is now actually at the University of, I'm not sure where he is physically, but he's a graduate student at the University of Victoria in British Columbia, and he's running an important leadership program to develop language leadership in people who have that kind of capacity to develop leadership in language revitalization.
I had one more question, and thanks for that information. In that book that you showed, is what Lanny was talking about, like the contact time and all of that literature that are the descriptors to what's happening in the public school system, basically, how those policies have been devised to limit the contact time to the blocks of time that we're dealing with now. Is that information along with like all of the math that is associated with that contact time, is that in that book?
I'm sorry to say it's not.
Bummer.
I'm going to write a second edition one of these days. I'm keeping notes of what to put in it.
Okay.
But there's a whole field of language policy that has started to, I mean, there's articles now on language policy and language revitalization that that might be helpful. I mean, it's still more complaining about language policy than how do we change. Hawaii, though, has done a really good job of changing language policy. And the problem, you know, what makes maybe many of us envious of Hawaii is since they're the only indigenous language, they actually were able to become the second official language of the state. And they changed language policy greatly from a policy where Hawaiian was not allowed to be used in the school to a policy that you know, where they could use language full time in the schools, that they could have immersion schools. They had to change policies even to have immersion schools, but there's still federal policy. And federal policy is not very friendly still to immersion schools and to public schools using the language at length. And all I can say about that is change the administration.
Also, everybody here in Montana, you know, we've had a lot of progress with what Senator Windy Boy had worked on, but we have policies in place that aren't enforced. So Jay and Lanny and everybody else, we need to demand that what was promised actually happens. By 2018, we were supposed to have every school on or near a reservation have immersion programs in place.
Wow.
That is not the reality. So we do have some policies that have not been enforced. So that's something we can look at. Also now, the Office of English Language Acquisition has really supported with the ANA grants and other things, both English language work for English language learners that are identified and that are American Indian, in conjunction with the development or maintenance of the heritage language. So I think we could look at that as well. You know, so there are policies that just people ignore.
Well, remember the 70s and 80s when bilingual schools were so great, and I remember the decline of the support of bilingual education, and I felt the death knell came when the Office of Bilingual Education changed its name to the Office of English Acquisition. So it's good to hear that they're turning around now.
I have, I guess there was the time that I wanted to waiting for some other people to come up with some, so I'll just fill in again, Leanne. And considering the circumstances right now with that COVID and all the challenges that school systems have to meet, what would you think, how would you tweak your methods to fit possibly hybrid or online classes? Just off the top of your head.
We've been thinking about this. Actually, we've been really busy. Eichels has been really busy with the fact that we had to cancel our Breath of Life workshop or institute this year. But we're busy right now with trying to replace it. We put it off till 21, so hopefully we'll have it next summer. But meanwhile, we're trying to have some Zoom meetings. And so we've been busy with planning these Zoom meetings for the people who had applied to come to campus to study the documents there. And we can put a lot of the documents onto the internet for them to view and still get teams together to study them. And so that's what we're doing with our time right now. But I've been thinking a lot about having a Master-Apprentice training session on Zoom. And among other things, helping the Master and Apprentice, if they're not in the, if they're not in the same stay-at-home household, how they could interact through Zoom. And they can't actually physically touch each other or anything like that, which is too bad, but they can, or they'd have to wash dishes in separate in separate kitchens or something. But so I'm hoping to develop some Zoom meetings with Master-Apprentice teams. And Carly, our educational director, has also developed some kits, some new kits with new books and new puppets, finger puppets and things like that she's putting into the kits just to send to the masters and apprentices, that those that can either work together or work on social media in some way. And if this is going to last for us for a long time, this COVID, then we have to learn things like that. We have to be able to do a lot online.
Thank you.
Thank you, Lenny.
Hey, my name's Steve Arca. I'm from Ronan, Montana. I appreciate the words, the teaching you shared with us. A lot of it seems fairly similar to what we're kind of doing, what we talk about doing with our elders. Like with us, what's kind of almost similar to California. We have like 15 fluent speakers, and like 4 of them are working with us, and one's not in Montana, one's in Washington. So that kind of presents that that mentorship problem, and that's there but very needed. So the difficulty, and whereas some other tribes, they may have all their speakers there, and it's a really good fit, and it's a really good thing to do. So I appreciate that, and I just wanted to add to that the discussion going on earlier. I think I learned this year in school that I think it was like 45, 40, or 40, 40, 10, or whatever. So 40% of the education, public education, comes from the states, and then the school boards is the other big percentage, and then federal is like 10%. That's the funding sources. So your state taxes, then your local taxes, and then your federal funding. So that's how we attack those problems. And Ioana was correct, I think, in that discussing what in Montana there is some legislation in place. We just need to help enforce that, and we need to be heavily involved in our local elections with our school boards, to help enforce that, because the big problem that's going through the nation right now is exactly our problem. We know that, and in a whole nother level on the reservations and the surrounding communities, the way we're treated with that. So that's our biggest battle within the school systems. We have Class 7 certifications through the state of Montana. Sometimes those are honored and sometimes not, and so we're still fairly new in some cases, and we got a lot of good things in place that a lot of hardworking people put before us. Before I become involved, I'm really new to this language world within the past couple of years. But I appreciate hearing what you have to say on how those things are done, and thank you for sharing what you did, and hope to hear more and see more of what's going on. Thank you.
Thank you. Just thinking about policies again, one of the things that a lot of states have been able to where Native people have been able to influence policy is the policy of language teachers being able to teach in the classroom if they don't have, even if they don't have teaching credentials. And so I think probably Montana has this. I know California and Oregon, Washington all have this of an eminence credential that if you are a speaker, you can teach your language. You don't have to be excluded from the classroom or always have another teacher, a credentialed teacher with you. You can do it. And if you, and who is a speaker is determined by the tribe, not by the state. So that, I think, is one movement that has been really important in changing policy in the schools.
We've had that, Leanne, here in place since 1995. Dr. Richard Littlebear led that cause, and you know, the authority was given back to the tribes where it always should be for
Right.
tribal members to decide who should be a culture and language teacher. I think we have 184 to date, I think, teachers that have earned Class 7 certification. But it still is problematic. Like last year when we did our professional development workshop, just calling the schools and finding out that so many of the schools didn't even know that they had a Class 7 teacher. So imagine the isolation and, you know, how not integrated they are into the community. So that's, and of course the professional development that's been ongoing is not adequate, and there's no state funding for that. And it's on soft money like everything else, and it just is really challenging. But at least we are proud of all the work that Dr. Littlebear did to make sure that did go through.
Oh, yeah, wonderful. Yeah, it's always 2 steps forward, 1 step back. But then 2 steps forward again.
So my name is Ace. I'm from Belcourt. I work at Turtle Mountain Community College, and I think a question I have and kind of been mulling on is, so you present on a Master-Apprentice model, which I think is absolutely awesome. And I think one challenge we have in our community is we have very few speakers. So how can that be tweaked, or are there alternate models that we can use for, because like the Ojibwe language is fairly prevalent. There's a lot of resources out there, but like, I don't know, what are your recommendations on navigating that dynamic, and what can you recommend for us, especially as we're starting to move towards an immersion model, but we also have very few master speakers. So how do we reconcile that? And yeah.
Right. And it may be a while before you can have an immersion school, for example. Although the Ojibways have some great immersion schools going in other communities, and so well, we are in the same place in California. So as I said, actually we're actually running out of native speakers. I have to be honest here. That 25 years ago, when ICLES was established, there were already less than 5 speakers of maybe 20 or 30 languages, and less than 50 of very few. And so we just figured we'd have to try to get all the speakers we could involved. And the Master-Apprentice program can involve them in a way that, say, teaching classes or something doesn't. And the teams have to form themselves. We don't form the teams. We say a team will apply to us, and they've chosen each other. So an elder and a young relative, for example, is an ideal team. So one of the issues is getting those speakers to do something like a Master-Apprentice model. And we have, it's not 100% success either, but some people just don't work out together. Some people don't have the time, it turns out, to get together as much as they should. But those people that become fairly fluent, there's some of them that are fluent enough that we're going to them to become masters. And so that's a possibility, but it takes several years to get to that point where you have somebody who becomes fluent enough to be a master. But because we're running out of speakers, we're also working with teams to, in a way, to join our Breath of Life program, which is based on documentation. And I think for you guys with Ojibwe, you must have enormous amounts of learning materials available. And maybe you should be doing something like the Salish program, where they're just learning through documentation. And maybe that is your route. And then for us, most of our languages don't have enough documentation. They have linguistic documentation, but that has to be completely reimagined and reworked to make it even something that people can understand, and much less to make materials for. So, we still depend on Master-Apprentice as much as we can, even if some of our masters aren't completely fluent, and we just try to get the documentation to help them with vocabulary that maybe they didn't know before, and so on.
Yeah, and one of the challenges, I mean, Ojibwe language has a huge amount of resources, but one of the challenges that sometimes it's like in very different dialects. So like the idiomatic phrases and even like just basic nouns are completely different. And so it's like, you know, what we don't want to do is fragment some of these things, and then they go out and they speak to somebody and that person's like, huh, you know, and so I think that's one of the challenges. And I think identifying which dialect is which, and how to, you know, break some of those down and maybe even develop our own, you know, documents and things like that is another challenge that we see a little bit of interference on. So,
well,
yeah.
I wonder if some of the, you know, once you've found a dialect that seems somewhat close, at least if maybe instead of being masters in the Master-Apprentice program, you could work with the speakers to say, well, how do we say it, and then just redo the whole document.
Yeah, I think that makes a lot of sense. Yeah. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you.
I have a thought for you, or just something I kind of was thinking about here. First, just lump, thank you, Leanne and Iowana. This was pretty awesome. It was good to kind of have a change of pace for us. We still have class every day, so even online, and it's a little difficult, but we're making the best of the situation, and you know, we still push our students as hard as we can. But kind of one of our ideas with our curriculum is when they finish it, they finish our apprentice program, then we tell them, now you're ready to start learning. And our hopes has, you know, we've only been doing this for just a few years, and our hopes has always been to put them into a Master-Apprentice program. Mm-hmm. So that's the way we've been looking at it, is that we put them through this apprenticeship that they learn all a pretty in-depth level of language, so that when we put them into the Master-Apprentice program with a fluent speaker, that they're not starting at the day one level.
Right.
They can start a little bit higher. But I just really, everything you shared today just is like, I could just see some of our students right now where they would just flourish in a Master-Apprentice program.
Yeah. Oh, that would be so ideal to, you know, for somebody who already has learned a lot of language to then just be able to excel at it by becoming conversationally fluent with a speaker. Hawaii is doing something like that. I don't know how official it is or anything, but they will often they also are mostly using second language speakers as teachers, and they have lots of good ways of teaching the language at the university level. But then they also like to have summer programs where the students will just go live with a native speaker. And that's our best apprentices are people that have gone to live with their masters for a week or a year or whatever.
I had a question. Thank you again for your talk. Just had a question that was kind of branching off of the previous question that Ace had asked, and the dealing with language situation where you don't have fluent speakers. So I work with the MHA Nation, where you have Mandan, Hidatsa, and Arikara, and 2 out of 3 of those have no conversationally fluent speakers.
Mm-hmm.
And we're trying to model the Salish Master-Apprentice program as much as we can in this situation. But again, we have our Arikara and Mandan apprentices are basically working with either mentors who are not fully fluent, themselves are L2 learners, or with a linguist like myself who has studied the language for years from a linguistic standpoint, knows how to speak it to a certain extent, but of course is not an L1 fluent speaker. So I was just wondering, do you have any experience or have you seen any good models of methodology, say from the Breath of Life program or tribes working with documentation materials where you can have either a more advanced learner and a newer apprentice kind of working together, kind of a mutual learning method, or
Yeah.
what would be your recommendations for such situations?
We've had some. Well, in the Breath of Life program, the way we run that program is that when it's not COVID-19 anyway, people all come to campus together, and maybe 40 California Indians will come to campus, and maybe in 1s or 2s, and they have all the materials that we have for their language are available to them. And each language group also has a linguist working with them. So they each get a linguistic partner. And so the linguistic partner is there to help them figure out what these, what's going on in these materials, and cut through the jargon of say a published grammar, or deal with the unique writing systems and things like that. And if things gel well, frequently the linguistic partner and the team continue to work together after Breath of Life, and really start developing things. So our Mutsun person who's now a board member, Karina Geary, her linguistic partner and her it still remain close associates to this day. And they've developed a dictionary of the language where every single word that has ever been written down for the Mutsun language is in that dictionary. There's another group where there was a teacher who came. She is Wailaki, and there's no speakers of Wailaki, but her school, the kids wanted to learn Wailaki, and so she was trying to set up a program. And she's an incredible teacher, and she had a really good linguistic partner, 2 linguistic partners actually we gave her, and they developed a relationship that allowed them to create a whole curriculum week by week as classes were going on. And so through that kind of teamwork, you can really make a lot of progress. And these kids were, because she's such a great teacher, even though she was learning the materials the morning before she taught them, they have really learned a lot of language. And they came to one of our conferences and really wowed everybody with their presentations. So I don't know, all I can give you is very individual kinds of events that work just because, not because there's a system to make them work, but because the individuals who got together made it work.
Thank you. Yeah, it's I mean, it always is a idiosyncratic situation by situation.
Yeah, but let's see, so I'm not sure that I fully gave you any ideas for the situation with your 2 languages.
3.
Yeah. Anyway, so.
Hi, Leanne, I'm back.
I
Anyway, I would like to commend you on reinforcing user-friendly, non-threatening methods. And it's kind of going to a comment that's going to transition to an article that you wrote regarding non-fluent speakers to become teachers, because a lot of these people have passion and they have the energy and they have the inspiration. And why I'm saying that is Jay and I, a couple of weeks ago, had a discussion about one of the topics that Ioana brought up about Class 7, utilizing people who could speak. Some of these people who can speak are not necessarily teachers, and it's really difficult to get them to understand new methods like the method that you are presenting here today, but also some people with a self-image challenge might not think they can teach language when they're non-fluent, but because they have the strengths of passion and inspiration, me as an individual, I'm purely confident that there are people out there, given the methods, given the techniques, given the expectations, given the reinforcement, can become teachers of a language, just like your article had said, because some of these people who are teaching in that Class 7 here, particularly in Montana, come from boarding schools or parochial schools where there was this top-down type of behaviorist, type of authoritarian type of technique. So they think that's how to teach. So they stand on a pedestal pointing at people and acting like no offense to Catholics, but acting like those nuns, or acting like those military people who are like superintendents, and being in a scenario where education is more condescending than it is to be an alive, a fun, a great experience. So I just want to say that you really reinforced that thought that, Jay and I were thinking we need to set some higher expectations of these Class 7 people regarding how do we get them to that point of where they are willing to learn methods and change their teaching style. So maybe you got some suggestions there.
Well, this is one of the reasons that the Master-Apprentice program gives so much responsibility to the apprentice, because we figure, okay, the speakers are probably not trained teachers. They are probably, in fact, we hope they aren't, because sometimes they're trained to teach like they were taught in boarding school or something. In fact, frequently the apprentice is going to be is going to know a lot more about teaching language, even though he doesn't know the language, than the speaker. And so we try to we try to give this apprentice a whole lot of responsibility for that reason, to have them lead they're learning how to teach themselves the language, essentially, how to get the language. But so I don't know how to really, I don't know how to train an elder to teach the language in a different way. And it's some of our elders that are masters, we have that problem. We just don't, if they are set in their ways about how to teach, and they're not going to change. And we have one or two elders right now where I don't think the apprentice is learning much because the elder believes that you have to have word cards, and that's how you're going to interact, and immersion is just not there. But so I don't know how to answer your question about how to
I
get.
think you had a good example there with that gal that had that just before my question, that had that inspiration and motivation to find those resources to present the language to them students. And that's the kind of confidence I guess I'm sort of, I guess, trying to point out or bring out in discussion, so that we can get people who have that passion and make it a, you know, like a loving, like a trusting environment to where people want to be around language learning rather than dealing with some personalities, you know. But
Right.
anyway, yeah, that was that previous comment you made on describing a great successful experience is something that I wanted to point out, that your article opens the door for some of those types of teachers, the one that you wrote on non-fluent teachers becoming teachers of a language.
Right. And of course, that's also how the Master-Apprentice program can work, to have an elder who's teaching the language to a good teacher who can then pass it on to the kids, rather than have the elder herself be the teacher. But one thing that I do think that it's a shame when you have a speaker. What I've frequently seen in language classrooms is a speaker, an elder, who's kind of in the side, and then you have a teacher who's not fluent, but is teaching the language, and then once in a while will ask the elder for a question, you know, for a word. And I feel like the elder is not being utilized very well in those cases. And that's why, even though it's an adult program rather than a classroom program, that the Master-Apprentice program really utilizes the elder and makes and the elder is really being useful in that kind of situation. And if there was a way to have a classroom where the elder could be used as the master in something similar to a Master-Apprentice program, that would be great. And I mean, there are ways that a classroom could be run where these survival questions that the apprentices learn could be taught to the kids in the classroom, so that they're eliciting language from a speaker. And so I could imagine that kind of situation being developed, where an elder who might not really know how to teach very well can become very useful in the classroom.
Yeah, I'd just like to add too on that. I think a lot of our elders, at least the ones that I've dealt with our language group, a lot of them never seen I think Chris Parkins has said this, and I just kind of borrow that from, but it's our elders never seen the transference of language, you know, because they're the last ones to learn the language. And so they're in their 70s and 80s now, and so they never really got to witness that and to do that. But the rest of us are excellent language teachers as we teach our children how to speak English. They have no choice, right? Radio, television, you got the internet now, all kind of things. English is never going to be a problem, and I think that's always a discussion that comes up when we start immersion schools. But I think also those elders, you know, the PTSD, we're all like, we're all in the middle of this explosion,
Yeah.
you know, in this generation. And our elders were some of the first line people that felt that explosion. You know, they were abused firsthand, some of them, you know, and so we're drawn off of them. And I think as students, we're always learning. And even when we're treated badly or we're hurt, we learn how not to do that, right? We pick that up and say, well, I'm not going to do that. You know, how do I do this now?
Mhm.
And so we're always mindful of that. I think that it's the passion. I think it was mentioned by a couple of speakers earlier. We all have that passion. And I know one thing for myself is years before I learned, I was told by this Christian guy, he told me, he's Steve, what's going to happen when, is what they believe as Christians, when Jesus comes back to you and he tells the Salish people, what happened to the language I gave you? And what happened to the songs I gave you? I come back, you're speaking someone else's language and you're singing someone else's songs. You know, was not what I give you good enough? Now, coming from his perspective, that's a beautiful thing, right? And that's an honorable and beautiful thing to think of. Because I think as people, as new learners, we carry a lot of shame and resentment and stuff as we're learning. That's why we're always so quiet. We want to speak our language. We want to come out in confidence, but we're just not. Am I saying it wrong? Am I going to get chastised for this? Or, you know, there's all those things. And so when somebody can come up to us from a whole nother, he was Samoan, by the way, on the South Pacific, but when we can come to the realization of who we are through language, you know, and lift our heads up and do that, I think. But those of us that are learning, you know, that's where we want to be. That's what we're fighting for, you know.
Right.
Although it's not going to cure everything for our people, you know, it is one of the biggest things that's going to help, that identification for our children, for ourselves, for our elders to see that, to bring all that back into our ceremonies and everything, you know, the whole package of who we are that identifies us as Skellig, you know, we call ourselves Skellig. It brings it all together as one, and that's what we're fighting for. And I think that's what we need to remember in this endeavor. All of us that are fighting to learn our languages and to bring it to our communities, because it's not just to learn it for myself, and we're all the same. I'm not just speaking for myself.
Right.
We're trying to bring it back to all of our people, you know, all of our people. So it's no longer required the hour or two or whatever we're fighting for in the public schools or in immersion schools or anything. We're not trying to teach it there. They're learning at home. You know, in the schools, we're using our languages to teach our children and our community members what we want to teach them in our languages, you know. So you go to Hawaii, you go to New Zealand, they meet you there and they greet you out at the airport. I've never been there, but I heard they'll greet you right there at the airport in their language and within their culture and their customs. And that's kind of how we should be, you know, get back to where we're at in that sense. So that's kind of my little take on it. Thank you. And thank you again, Ioana and Leanne. Awesome.
Thank you.
Thank you. My goodness. Stipe, you have me thinking about that really incredibly moving account that Andrew Windyboy has on Our Spirits Don't Speak English. And he's sharing how of course, language Chippewa was beaten out of him. And here he is as an adult, and that pain of not even being able to speak to the Creator. And I think it's so important that we look at that closely integrated language and culture, that they're not separate. And so whether it's revitalizing or maintaining or learning for the first time your language, that the important role that plays is just so profound. So thank you for that.
Yeah, thank you.
And thank you, Leanne. Thank you so much. Thank you, everybody. This has been so inspirational. I really appreciate it. And it's wonderful to hear everything all the good work everybody's doing. We're coming to the end. Does anybody have one last question? Or I hope this is an ongoing series again. So we'll have to see. It'd be lovely if we could all be together somewhere and not on Zoom, but I really appreciate you being willing to get together and join us in this fashion. For now, that's what we have, right?
Yep, I'm glad to be in Montana on Zoom.
We're so grateful to have you here with us.
Well, it's been a
Thank you.
pleasure to talk with all of you, to meet people that I haven't met before that are doing such great work with their language, and to see people like Lanny Reelbird again after many years. So thanks a lot. It's been a pleasure for me.
Well, thank you all. And Casey's recording this. We'll let everybody know where both recordings are available to you. And again, we will all stay in touch, and we'll see what the next step is. So thank you so much, everybody. Thank you.
And email me if anybody wants to talk further about anything.
Mhm.
Yeah, you betcha.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Bye, everyone.